Wall, thank you so much for joining us. I appreciate it.
Thank you.
Tell me a bit about this deal.
It's very historic. The Indian civilian nuclear power industry sector is poised for growth. The government there, Prime Minister Modi has signaled, he signaled at the announcement with the Prime Minister with respect to this deal that they're going to be expanding their nuclear fleet. The percentage increase will be a 650% increase in nuclear power in India. 6 reactors coming online, being built to add to the fleet of over 20 reactors now. Up until now, Canadian uranium, and you'll know that in Saskatchewan we mine 15% of the world's uranium, has not had any access to that market. And so we're very grateful for the fact that the federal government, the Prime Minister himself, took this upon himself, I think in a personal way, has negotiated or ensured that nuclear cooperation agreements were negotiated with India and China. So now Canadian uranium, and an important industry in our province, has access to those markets. This deal represents 7 million pounds of Saskatchewan uranium into that nuclear power market in India. By the way, there's 50 million pounds going into the Chinese market from now until about 2025. So this means not just job stability in the mining sector, but it means in the future, I think, expanded job opportunities in uranium mining. Cameco, the company that'll be selling the uranium, great success story. One of the best employers in terms of Aboriginal Canadians. 45% of their workforce in Saskatchewan is First Nation or Métis. So this is a big, it was a big day for Saskatchewan. Something we had worked on. I've been going on trade missions to India, had met with Prime Minister Modi when he was a chief minister or a premier, the equivalent of a premier, and it's why we do these trade missions, to try to help these things along, and it was a great announcement.
How long had the deal been in the works? And I'd read some reports saying that negotiations were taking place as close as last week. Is that true?
I think that's fairly representative. These have been going on for years. We were even engaged. I was engaged over the telephone. In Asia, there's a state-to-state component to trade. There's so many state-owned enterprises, not just in India, but across Asia. So that's why trade missions from provinces and our federal government are important. You establish relationships, and I was on the phone with officials a couple times in the spring, late winter, spring, and it's a big deal and historic. So I think there was work going on with respect to the agreement until recently.
Were you ever worried it wouldn't happen?
Sure, absolutely. It's been worked on for a long time, and I think there were moments where you think there's one. You're hearing reports from Cameco and others that there might be one, and it's elusive. It doesn't quite happen. But the company was very determined. Cameco's they're very good at marketing uranium around the world, and they did a great job on this file, assisted by the Prime Minister, of course. The nuclear cooperation agreement the federal government executed, and I hope we were able to help as well.
Can you quantify what the deal means for Saskatchewan and for Canada?
Well, it's difficult in terms of the actual dollar value of the deal because, of course, the price is something that's negotiated and it's confidential, and we need to respect that. But we know what the spot price is, and we can do the math because there's 7 million pounds that will be sold, and so it's in the hundreds of millions of sales. But we're going to see expanded activity in terms of mining, and I think, although the company's saying, the current workforce can probably handle this, I think down the road there's a chance for expansion in jobs. For Canada, it's important, not just from an economic standpoint, but think about it from a greenhouse gas standpoint. Right now in India, on the books is over 500 new coal-fired plants. In China, by the way, they're building a coal-fired plant once every 11 days. So if the world was serious about greenhouse gas emissions, and we know that 30% of the emissions come from coal, we either have to clean the coal up, which we're doing in Saskatchewan, as you know, through a major project there, or replace baseload electricity options with cleaner energy. Nuclear is part of that, and that's what Prime Minister Modi was referencing when he had the meeting with the Prime Minister. So it's not just important to Canada from an economic standpoint. I think there's an environmental impact here. If India is deciding to move away from new coal towards, they're going to do both, I think, but move away by degree from new coal towards uranium or nuclear.
Let me ask you about the environment for a second. Carbon capture and storage. I know it's big for your province. How's it working so far?
It's working, and we're pretty happy about that. The project, the innovation part of the project on this. Well, we should explain it first. I guess I should explain it. We've taken an existing coal-fired plant. We've innovated new carbon capture technology at the plant to remove the CO2. We're removing all the sulfur. We're reduced We've reduced the other emissions as well. And we're selling the CO2 to oil companies who use it as enhanced oil recovery, and then it's stored geologically. And we've been storing CO2. 15% of the stored CO2 in the world is in our province, in Saskatchewan. And the United Nations and the International Energy Agency confirm this is a good way to sequester and remove CO2. So our projects was on time and on budget on the innovation part of it, on the new technology part, which is something in government we don't say all too often. We'd like to say it more. And it's capturing 90% of the CO2. It's cleaner by measure even than natural gas now, a lot cleaner. I think a quarter of the emissions of a natural gas plant of the same size. And this is coal we're talking about. Now, this is first generation technology, so we need to keep working on the technology and ensuring that costs come down so it could potentially be deployed in places around the world that are building coal. And it's not just emerging economies that are adding coal. Japan, Germany, I mean, this is still an issue we need to deal with.
Let me ask you about big picture though. How big of an impact does CCS have on emissions, on Saskatchewan reaching its targets? It's a big topic this week. Obviously, you just come from the climate change conference with other premiers.
Well, we are on a per capita basis fairly high emitters. That's why we felt it was right. We made it the highest per capita public investment in technology to mitigate against CO2. That's this project. It's going to help a lot. It's going to help Sask Power, which is the largest emitter in the province because of its use of coal power. It's going to help our electrical utility to reduce its emissions. And if we don't get Sask Power to reduce their emissions, it'll be hard for us to meet our targets. International groups, the International Panel on Climate Change, the Pembina Institute, they all agree that CCS is actually very important. And the reason it's important is because coal's not going away. We can do cap and trade regionally here in Canada, and we should look at every instrument, I guess, that might work in certain parts of the country. We can do carbon taxes. We can, we can proceed with our own policies. And again, this is not I'm not critical of that. But if we're not dealing with base load issues around the world, the fact that coal is advancing and it's the #1 source of greenhouse gas emissions, in terms of an energy source, 30% of the world's GHGs come from coal-fired power. If we're not, all of us, focused on the technology to either clean coal up or find a replacement base load, then are we really going to deal with the issue? Will we really reach the goals that we don't have? It's not just that Canada has, but other countries around the world have.
In addition to CCS, would you ever consider something like a cap and trade or carbon pricing system?
Well, we actually have a carbon pricing system with CCS because we sell the CO2. So we've had to price that CO2 and companies are buying it. By the way, I like the idea of actually getting money for the CO2 for Sask Power. And with respect to other ways of pricing it, Alberta uses a levy, as you well know. This is the same model we will use when we're ready to implement our system, when we know what the oil and gas regulations will be that the federal government will pass. So we'll have a price, but no, we won't do a carbon tax, and no, we will not do cap and trade.
So you would implement some kind of levy system once you have direction from the federal government?
Correct. And technically, we've got a price for carbon. Now, admittedly, it's not systemic. It's not province-wide. It's at this one facility. But we've set the value, and it's a good value, by the way.
So do you think the federal government is taking too long providing that direction?
We need to be very careful with the regs on oil and gas, especially now. This is an industry that is under stress, and there are constituents back home who have lost their jobs. And there have been many job losses in Alberta. And so we need to be careful about these regs, that we're not unintentionally damaging the economy, especially at a time when this particular sector is under a lot of stress.
So you're not in the camp of provinces that we're talking in the past few days about the federal government, not providing direction, taking too long?
Not with respect to regs. I think we're going to hear from the federal government soon on what they want their overall targets to be in advance of the Paris conference coming up at the end of the year. And I think having those out in a timely way is important. But with respect to regulations on certain sectors, regulations that could actually, if we're not careful, cost Canadians jobs, we should be very careful.
If it's okay, I'll just jump quickly back to get a few more questions in on this deal. There are some concerns among some, for example, some nuclear proliferation experts that supplying uranium to a country like India could allow it then to use its own uranium supply to help its direct it towards military supplies.
Yeah, I think in the case of India, those folks need to really check the facts. I think of the 3 million pounds per year that India needs, they can produce for themselves 1 million pounds. So they're going to be, they need to import simply to generate electricity. They're going to need more if they expand their industry. And I would say that they have been getting their uranium now. I would argue that if uranium can come from Canada, a stable and a stable source of that uranium, and a country that puts a premium on sustainable development of the uranium from an environmental perspective, I think that's favorable to the uranium coming from some of the other places it could come from.
So no concerns about supplying to a country like India, sitting on the margins of the nuclear proliferation treaty?
No, I think we've worked through those. I don't think we would have concluded a nuclear cooperation agreement with a country where those concerns still in play. And the same is true for China, by the way. I mean, Australia has similar agreements, and they've gotten to the point where they're comfortable. And it's not just a comfort level. There's an accountability piece to all of these agreements. And I'm sure the federal government is in that same space with respect to agreements in China and India. They are getting their uranium now. I'll go back to that point again. And so I think it's important that we take the opportunity to create some economic opportunities for Canadians here and sell some uranium, but also have in this way, India has a partnership on the nuclear cycle with a country that, our country, that offers a stability and I think a real progressive approach to the issue.
Is there a point at which details for this deal will become more public?
Well, there are a lot of details. There's 7 million pounds, and we know the price on the market. Like, we don't know the exact price it was negotiated, as I said off the top. I don't think we'll ever know that, and nor should we, because it's a matter of it's a confidentiality piece between the company and that's selling the uranium and those that are buying it. We know the amount and we know roughly what price is today, so I think we have most of the details.
Are there any triggers that will be built in that would lead to the termination of the deal? Will that kind of stuff be public knowledge?
That's a great question for the federal government. We encourage the conclusion of the nuclear cooperation agreement with India and China. I'd expect the short answer to that is yes, but the federal government would be the right one to answer that.
Great. Thank you so much. I really
you.
appreciate your time.
Good to see you.